Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Michael Collins Piper here. It is Friday night. It is, I don't know what day it is. I mean, I know it's Friday. It's the 19th of February. Got a lot to talk about here in the show tonight, folks. I had some things I wanted to talk about last night, and then I went downtown again today to try to get that damn book, Capitalism and the Jews, which blames the Christians for the fact that the Jews became so predominant in capitalism. Oh, that's classic. I mean, well, I still haven't been able to get my hands on that book. But fortunately, between a trip to the cigar store and the bookstore, I remembered, or I shouldn't say I remembered, I happened across a book that I did say, I had mentioned it here in the program the other night, and I wanted to pick it up, and I forgot to pick it up. I forgot the title, but there it was, right in front of me on the bookshelf. And this book is a doozy, folks. It's by David Aaronovitch. It's entitled Voodoo Histories. The subtitle is The Role of the Conspiracy Theory in Shaping Modern History. There's a lot to comment on about this book, folks. But perhaps one of the most interesting things about the book, from my estimation, and I happen to be mentioned in the book, but what's interesting is that, there's so much interesting about the book, folks. So we're just going to have to go through it here tonight, hit some of the highlights, and it's going to be interesting. Now, this book by David Aaronovitch, and I hasten to add that's not an Irish name. He has an interesting approach on this, folks. It's talking about conspiracy theories. Just going to read you a couple little excerpts from it. He says conspiracists, and they're always calling me a conspiracy theorist, folks, because I wrote the book Final Judgment, which puts forth a conspiracy theory about the JFK assassination. Well, he says conspiracists work hard to convince people that conspiracy is everywhere. Well, that's not true. There are many conspiracies everywhere, folks. There are many conspiracies everywhere, in many places. But as I have said repeatedly on this program, not everything that takes place is a conspiracy. Although, in fact, this author is right. There are many people who just absolutely refuse to believe that anything that we're told that has happened really has happened. So I'll give this Irish writer 1 point there. But here's the attitude. Of the book. He says, part of my motivation for writing this book was a lighthearted aim of providing a useful resource to the millions of men and women who have found themselves on the wrong side of a bar or dinner party conversation that begins, quote, I'll tell you the real reason, blah, 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 and have sat there knowing it was all likely to be nonsense, but rarely having the necessary arguments to hand. It is designed to offer users of the Internet something that can act as a counterpoint to the tens of thousands of websites that argue, post in, post out, that they are almost certainly out to get you. Well, it's ironic that a Jew, and Mr. Aaronovitch is a Jew, or I'm guessing by the name, Aaronovitch. It's a Jewish priestly name, I do believe. This Jew, and I am calling him a Jew because it's relevant here, this Jew who obsesses about anti-Semitic conspiracy theories, this Jew is part of a group of people who, as an organized group of people, and who through their constant caterwauling through organizations like the Anti-Defamation League and the American Jewish Congress and the Simon Wiesenthal Center, are the biggest purveyors of conspiracy theories day in, day out, 24/7. There's always an ongoing conspiracy somewhere against the Jews. There have been conspiracies throughout history against the Jews. The biggest conspiracy against the Jews was carried out by Haman, of course, and then dear little Queen Esther, that nice little Jewish girl, came in and got Haman, and they killed 75,000 Persians, along with Haman and his sons and his brothers and his aunts and uncles and everybody else. Yeah, the Jews are the biggest conspiracy theorists anywhere, folks. They're all yakking about the Nazi conspiracy and how, well, hell, we even have patriots who are yakking about the Nazi conspiracy. Puts them right in bed with the same people as this guy, Aaronovitch, David Aaronovitch. But this is interesting. He says, listen to this very carefully, the belief in conspiracy theories is, I hope to show, harmful in itself. It distorts our view of history and therefore of the present, and, if widespread enough, leads to disastrous decisions. Essentially, what he's saying, folks, is that everything that it has been reported by the mainstream media or the official U.S. government conclusions about the Kennedy assassination or 9/11 or Waco or the bombing of the Murrah building in Oklahoma City, everything that we've heard is absolutely true, and anybody who questions it is dangerous. And you see, he isn't just people who dare talk about people who dare to talk about the you-know-whos. There are so many, particularly in the Patriot movement, who think if they avoid talking about the you-know-whos, that the you-know-whos will ignore them and forget about them and not tap their phones and steal their swimming trunks off their, put rocks in their swimming trunks on their hotel balconies in Abu Dhabi. Had to listen to last night's program to know what that's in reference to, folks. We will continue when we come back, discussing this book, Voodoo Histories, by a Jewish gentleman who really thinks that conspiracy theories are dangerous and that they're the work of losers and all sorts of things. But here we get some real insights into his Talmudic mindset, his filthy Talmudic mindset. It almost reads like something out of Eric Hufschmidt. He says, consider for a moment the repressed sadism that seems to lurk behind a lot of assassination conspiracism. The descriptions of the death, the reports from the autopsy, the photographs of the body. The British conspiracy theorist Robin Ramsey, in his small book on assassination literature, writes almost pornographically of, quote, parts of JFK's skull bouncing onto the boot of the presidential limousine, end quote. And forgive me for this, ladies and gentlemen, but I'm going to read it. He says, Marilyn, referring to Marilyn Monroe, Marilyn is injected or has medicines inserted into her anus. Now, folks, descriptions of the death, the reports from the autopsy, the photographs of the body, I'm here to tell you that if you're investigating a crime, particularly murder, you got to get into that subject area. But this British Jew, who is campaigning against Nazism and anti-Semitism, says that if you look into the forensic aspects of a crime like an assassination, that's repressed sadism. He has to bring sex into it, and then he has to mention the fact that there are many people who believe that possibly Marilyn Monroe died from some sort of poisoned suppository. But you see, this is this twisted Talmudic mindset that prevails. Now, I mentioned that I'm mentioned in this book, and what's very, very interesting is how I am mentioned in this book, and the manner in which I am mentioned in this book could lead one to believe, it could lead one to conclude that some of those who have suspected for a long time, and I'm not necessarily one of them, but there have been those who have suspected for a long time that Christopher Berlin, known as Kinky Balloon, King of the Partoos, there are those who believe that he was inserted into the 9/11 truth movement via the Spotlight and American Free Press in anticipation of 9/11 by his handlers in order to put out good information mixed with bad information. Kinky Balloon is mentioned in this book. They initially make reference to the fact that he spoke at a conference in Europe entitled The Axis for Peace. They say he was a journalist for the ultra-right-wing American Free Press. They say then a journalist for the ultra-right-wing American Free Press. So the author is obviously aware that Boleyn was ignominiously removed from American Free Press. And then it goes on to condemn American Free Press and the Barnes Review and Willis Carto. And it talks about Boleyn's specialism, as he puts it. Boleyn's specialism at the magazine became articles on 9/11 conspiracy theories. Well, he disappears, Balloon as we call him, disappears for a few pages, and then we get a hilarious description of Eric Hufschmidt's recorded hour-long conversation between himself and Dylan Avery and Corey Rowe, or maybe he pronounces that Rao, and Jason Burmis. And then we get back to Christopher Boleyn. And it goes on to say, I take this as a compliment in its own way, he says, Boleyn, he says, since September 12, 2001, there have been theories linking Israelis, Jews, Zionists, the names always indicating the same people, to the worst terrorist incident in history. Christopher Boleyn was one of the leading American protagonists of this strand, along with his American Free Press colleague, Michael Collins Piper. So I am honored to be noted as having been one of the leading American protagonists of the strand linking Israel to the 9/11 massacre here on American soil. Now, here is where it gets very, very interesting. And I was not aware of this. It says, but the story that provided the initial impetus for the claims of a Zionist plot was the urban myth repeated by Boleyn that 4,000 Jews or Israelis, the description varies, mysteriously stayed at home on the day of the attacks, clearly forewarned about what was to happen. Now it goes on to describe this famous story. And then it says, later, when 4,000 Israelis did not turn up dead in the World Trade Center, this permitted those who wanted to, such as Boleyn, to note a non-existent discrepancy. Well, folks, this is very, very interesting that I am essentially smeared through a connection to something that Christopher Boleyn said, when in fact, as many of you with longer-term memories will recall, early on after 9/11, I wrote an article for American Free Press refuting the idea that 4,000 Israelis stayed home. I said that it was a myth. I said there was no substance to that story. And yet here I am being linked to Christopher Boleyn, who apparently has been still promulgating and promoting that myth. I do recommend you read this book because it's a good example. It's really boring in many respects, all sorts of pseudo-intellectual crap in here, but attempting to analyze why people believe in conspiracy theories. And it is written by this David Aaronovitch, who I'm going to refer to and henceforth refer to people like him as a smear Jew. He's a smear Jew. Why am I going to call him a smear Jew? Because he has a Jewish agenda, and he's smearing people on behalf of that Jewish agenda. So he is a smear Jew. Looks like I'm going to start referring to some of these neoconservatives as war Jews. I'm going to start identifying people. I think it's about time we start doing that. You're not supposed to do that. I'm going to start doing it. Because if they are acting from a Jewish agenda, then by God, we will name that Jewish agenda, and we will name the fact that these people are Jews acting on behalf of a Jewish agenda. So David Aaronovitch is a smear Jew. Now, what's very, very interesting, what leads me further to believe that it was an attempt to smear me by linking me to Christopher Bolin's false claims that can easily be refuted regarding 4,000 Jews that didn't show up at the World Trade Center. 4,000 Israelis, apparently. According to him, Bolin has said that. He later talks about the attack on the USS Liberty. Now, does he have a whole chapter on the USS Liberty, folks? No. He has a chapter about a gentleman by the name of Norman Baker, a British fellow, who has apparently written about conspiracies surrounding the death of I guess he's this Dr. Kelly. I guess he was a British scientist who was apparently murdered. I forget the details of it. They say he committed suicide. Many people believe he was murdered. But at any rate, in the middle of this long, convoluted chapter, all of a sudden he brings up this same Mr. Baker's reference to the attack on the USS Liberty. He says, he quotes Baker as having referred to the CIA intelligence ship Liberty being bombed, and then he goes on to say, this is Baker writing, that it is now widely accepted that the attack was ordered by President Lyndon Johnson himself. Well, okay, folks, we know up front that it's not widely accepted that President Lyndon Johnson ordered the attack on the USS Liberty. So if Norman Baker wrote that, he obviously either didn't know what he was talking about or he misworded what he was writing about. And then, of course, the author here, this smear Jew, Aaronovitch, points out that Baker referred to the Liberty as being a CIA intelligence ship, but we know the Liberty was not a CIA intelligence ship. It was a Navy ship that had National Security Agency and other intelligence people aboard. There may have been some CIA people aboard. We'd have to check with Phil Turney or somebody else about that. But obviously, Mr. Baker was mistaken, referring to the CIA. The CIA is an American institution. He may have confused it with the NSA, just as a lot of Americans confuse Israel's domestic intelligence service, what is it called? Shabak, I believe. Is that what it is? I'm not even sure myself. I know Christopher Bolin's first wife was a member of that particular Israeli domestic intelligence service. But a lot of people confuse that with the Mossad, just as a lot of people confuse MI5 and MI6 in Britain. People who don't know any better, I couldn't tell you the difference. In any case, what's interesting here is that Aaronovitch, the smear Jew, is now using these mistakes by Mr. Baker to implicitly discredit people like Phil Turney and the other survivors of the USS Liberty who say that the attack on the Liberty was deliberate. Now, the author here, this smear Jew, does say it isn't difficult to accept that the whole thing was a tragic error, and goes on and say in this regard, in this vein. But you see what he's doing? He's implying that because Baker made some mistakes in talking about the USS Liberty, that implies then that the survivors of the USS Liberty are also not to be believed, that they are conspiracy theorists. So this is the tone of this work. He uses Baker to smear mistakes by Baker to smear the survivors of the USS Liberty, totally out of the blue, and he brings me up totally out of the blue and uses Christopher Bolin's falsehoods, whether accidental or deliberate, to smear me by linking me to this person. So anyone who reads about these mistakes by Christopher Bolin, and I have been reliably informed by a lot of different people that Bolin has made a lot of egregious mistakes in some of his writing, and we assume they are mistakes. But again, this is the trick. This is the trick being used by this smear Jew. Now, the whole book, as I say, you really need read the book for yourself. It's worth reading the manner in which they approach it. And, of course, it's kind of funny. It's kind of funny. In the opening pages, of course, you guessed it, he gets into the famous protocols of the learned elders of Zion. Now, prior to that, he's talking about the Bolshevik Revolution. And he refers to the supposed prominence of the Jews in Soviet Russia was remarked upon by the professional diplomats working for the British Foreign Office. He goes on about that. He says American diplomats were telling their bosses much the same thing. He even says the perception that the Jews were behind the Russian Revolution informed the opinions of some of the most illustrious political figures of the time, even in phlegmatic Britain. And then, of course, after he's established this idea that there were people who were daring to point out the fact that Jews were predominant in the communist movement, which is a historical fact, not a theory, not a conspiracy theory, just a damned plain old fact, then we get into the subject of, as he titles it, Enter the Protocols. And then, of course, he goes on to go back and forth, page after page, about how the protocols were forged or picked up from previous writings, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Well, there have been refutations of many of the things that he claims in here. But needless to say, he has again, he avoids the truth. He avoids the facts. But of course, we can expect this. It's very interesting too. He talks about Charles Lindbergh. Now, you remember Charles Lindbergh was attacked in Jim Marr's book, The Rise of the Fourth Reich. Lindbergh was attacked for his fervent America First nationalism, his opposition to the United States getting involved in a foolish, needless, destructive war with Germany. And he talks about the America First Committee. And this is worth mentioning. Who were some of the other people who supported the America First Committee? Names are familiar to you. Sinclair Lewis, William Saroyan, John Dos Passos, Edmund Wilson, E.E. Cummings, First World War air ace Eddie Rickenbacker, actress Lillian Gish, architect Frank Lloyd Wright, two future presidents, Gerald R. Ford, and John F. Kennedy, and future novelist Gore Vidal. Senators like Burton Wheeler of Montana, Robert LaFollette of Wisconsin, Robert Taft of Ohio, William Borah of Idaho, and Gerald Nye. These are the kind of people who were supporting Charles Lindbergh and the America First Committee. Charles Lindbergh, who is bashed and trashed by Jim Marrs. What does that tell you? He references in this book, folks. I mean, there's a lot in this book I could go into, folks. I mean, I could go on and on, but this is interesting in itself. He's talking about John T. Flynn, who was a great writer of the 30s and 40s and a very big critic of Franklin Roosevelt. Well, Flynn was involved in the America First Committee. And, of course, Flynn was absolutely flabbergasted when Charles Lindbergh said that the three most important groups who have been pressing this country toward war are the British, the Jewish, and the Roosevelt administration. Behind these groups, but of lesser importance, are a number of capitalists, Anglophiles, and intellectuals who believe that their future and the future of mankind depends upon the domination of the British Empire. These war agitators comprise only a small minority of our people, but they control a tremendous influence. It is not difficult to understand why Jewish people desire the overthrow of Nazi Germany. This is Lindbergh talking. But no person of honesty and vision can look on their pro-war policy here today without seeing the dangers involved in such a policy, both for us and for them. Instead of agitating for war, the Jewish groups in this country should be opposing it in every possible way, for they will be among the first to feel its consequences. Well, now, here's what Lindbergh wrote in his diary. He says, John Flynn came in and we talked the situation over. Flynn says he does not question the truth of what I said at Des Moines, but feels it was inadvisable to mention the Jewish problem. It is difficult for me to understand Flynn's attitude. He feels as strongly as I do that the Jews are among the major influences pushing this country toward war. He has said so frequently, and he says so now. He is perfectly willing to talk about it among a small group of people in private. But apparently he would rather see us get into the war than mention in public what the Jews are doing, no matter how tolerantly and moderately it is done. My God, that could be written by me or by Mark Glenn or by Hashem Talawi or Phil Turney, or you name the list of people who dare to talk about the people who are today pushing us for war, and yet we have other people who don't want to talk about it. They say, "Oh, lay off the Jews. Don't talk about the Jews. They'll blame it on Bohemian Grove, or blame it on them Muslims, or blame it on this, or blame it on that." Well, that's probably not relevant to the overall discussion of this book, which I'm quoting from here, by this war Jew. But isn't it interesting that what they try to do when they discredit bigger, broader questions of political power and who is misusing that political power, they lambaste it all with that concoction called conspiracy theory. Isn't it interesting, folks? Isn't it interesting? Yeah, I could talk about that at length, folks. Voodoo Histories is the title of the book. The author is David Aaronovitch, Aaronovitch. It goes on and on and on, doesn't it? Well, we have some callers. We have Jim in California.
Hi, Michael. How are you doing?
How you doing, Jim?
Oh, not bad. I would like to add some commentary to this term, conspiracy theory. And really, conspiracy theory is just an alternate explanation, alternate from the government's explanation of a major historical event like the Kennedy assassination, 9/11, or so forth. But what it seems what organized Jewry has done is they have gone out of their way over the last 30 or 40 years to poison this term, to tar and feather this term, so that anybody who proposes an alternate theory as to, say, what happened on 9/11 is then labeled a conspiracy theorist, and then all that negative, pejorative baggage that the Jews have attached to that expression then is attached to that person.
Absolutely.
So
absolutely.
Like, I don't, if I were to say to a man on the street, well, I think that there was a rogue element within our government that carried out 9/11 or coordinated it. Oh, you're a conspiracy theorist, the man on the street would say to me. So he's not just saying you're a conspiracy theorist like you have an alternate theory. He's saying you're a dirty, filthy, worthless, idiot, moron, conspiracy theorist.
Absolutely.
And
absolutely.
all those,
and you know what's funny? There was a Hollywood film, which I have a copy of, and it's entitled Conspiracy. And you know what this conspiracy is? It purports to be a docudrama on the famous Wannsee Conference, where the Germans supposedly got together to conspire to kill 600 million Jews. Now, see, in that case, that kind of conspiracy existed. It is acceptable to call this thing a conspiracy, even though, who was it, some famous Israeli historian, I believe it was, said that whole story of the Wannsee Conference being the place where the final solution was concocted, he says that's all a bunch of hoo-ha or something like that. I'm very flippantly and casually paraphrasing him, but that's essentially what he said. And yet here, this film, Conspiracy, they put the word right in the title.
Yes.
It's kind of again, and you know what that comes back to? It comes back to this schizophrenic mindset that I've often commented upon on the part of the Jews. On the one hand, they say, "Oh, these conspiracy theorists, no one takes them seriously." But in the next breath, they go on and write whole books to explain why you shouldn't believe these people who nobody takes seriously.
Yes. I would like to add one more comment.
Yeah, go ahead.
There's a new show, and I haven't seen it, but it's I think it's called Conspiracy Theory by Jesse Ventura.
Yeah, I've heard about it. I haven't seen it.
This entire the production, the concept of the show, this is my opinion anyways, the concept of the show, the choosing of Jesse Ventura to host it, and then labeling the show conspiracy theory is right in line with what I said at the outset of my call. Because Jesse Ventura, I agree with him in a lot of areas, but he, let's face it, I mean, he was a wrestler, and there's a certain image, not a non-academic image associated with his past as a wrestler. And so they don't get somebody like Richard Gage, the head of Architects and Engineers for 9/11 Truth, who's suit wearing, speaks meticulous background to host conspiracy theory. They get Jesse Ventura, and it's nothing against Jesse Ventura,
right? But Jim, I'm glad you say that, because I know you're not attacking Jesse Ventura. And
no,
I don't have any axe to grind against him either. And you know what? I'll tell you something. I actually, over the years, have watched professional wrestling and found it very entertaining. But from what I know about it, it's all fake.
Yeah. Can Jim, I say one last thing?
Listen, stay on for the break. Stay on for the break, Jim. Yeah, okay, we are going to the final break, folks. I can't believe this hour is over with. I've yacked and yacked and yacked. Once again, I guess I was fated to do radio. Welcome back, Michael Collins Piper here. We have Jim from California aboard. Jim, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just wanting to one final comment about the Jesse Ventura thing. So it was a month or two ago. I was at some, I think it was a pro-Palestinian lecture at USC, and I had overheard two students, or whoever they were, sitting in front of me, and one of them mentioned to the other the Jesse Ventura show called Conspiracy Theory, and the other person replied, "Oh, you going to believe that wrestler?" And I said, "That's it. That embodies, that comment, that thought that just took place, that impression that person had was embodied the motivation of the producer of the show. Let's create a show called Conspiracy Theory and have an ex-wrestler host it to discredit, to tar and feather the term conspiracy theory even more."
I'll tell you, Jim, and sadly, as I always used to say to Jim from Texas, I wish you were wrong, but I fear you're right. That's exactly what it comes down to, because it is implying what implicit in the whole format of the show is that, this week we're going to talk about a conspiracy theory. We're going to entertain you. We're going to entertain you with something that is entertaining. Well, when I talk about the fact, and I will call it a fact, that Israeli intelligence was up to its eyeballs in the assassination of John F. Kennedy, people may call that a conspiracy theory, but theory or not, it's a very serious matter. It's not a matter of entertainment. It's not a matter of entertainment that traitors in the United States government have helped cover up what really happened on 9/11, and I do happen to believe it was carried off by the Israelis, however it was carried off. And that's not entertainment when 3,000 people died, and 3,000 people did die. So yeah, I think you're right, Jim. I wish you were wrong. I hate to throw a wet blanket on things, and I should be here saying, "Oh, isn't it great that Jesse Ventura is out there publicizing conspiracy theories?" But what worries me is that people turn on the television and watch that show for 1 hour and say, "Ooh, isn't that interesting?" And hey, interesting. And then they go on and drink their beer and watch the football game.
Mm-hmm.
You see, it's like dispensing with it in an hour. It's been covered. That's the conspiracy theory. That's what people are saying. Isn't it interesting?
Yeah.
Now it may get truth out there to people, but the format, the packaging of it is not precisely what it should be. These conspiracy theories should be reported every night on the evening news. There should be interviews with people like the guys from the group you're talking about.
Architects and Engineers for 9/11.
Architects and Engineers. Yeah, they should be interviewing people like that on a regular basis, not as a little 5-minute squib on Entertainment Tonight where they come on and say, "Oh, a bunch of professors think that there was a conspiracy around 9/11.
Yeah, and then they always say, I bet you believe in little green men from Mars, too. Again, it's the same tactic. If you believe the government was involved in 9/11, we're lumping you in that basket of those who believe in aliens from outer, from the cosmos.
Et cetera, right. Whatever it happens to be.
You're mentally pathological.
Well, and that's what the theme of this book by this Jew smear artist, Aaronovitch, is all about. It's saying that people, he says that people who believe in conspiracy theories are losers.
Exactly. It's just what I was saying. Yeah. I mean, I don't agree with that. You know what I'm...
right.
His tactic is the same. Yeah.
Exactly. All right, well, we're running out of time, Jim. I thank you for your call. Apologies to John and to Steve. I would have liked to have brought them up. They always contribute to this program. But guess what? We are out of time. It's not a conspiracy. It's a fact. It's just the way it works. Anyway, folks, thanks for listening. I just have so many other things to talk about. Next week, I'm going to tell you about a fascinating new book that's been written, and you will have to read this book. A book written by Carolyn Yeager, who has been a frequent guest on this program, and not enough frequently on this program. We're going to have her back real soon when her book comes back from the printer, but it's a book I want to tell you about.